I never thought my life would involve dodging grenades, outsmarting bank robbers, or battling an ex hellbent on turning our chaos into a reality show. But sometimes, the most unexpected twists lead you to the people, and the peace, you never saw coming. In my early years, I often felt misunderstood, like an outsider trying to fit into a world that didn't quite make sense to me. Growing up with Asperger's syndrome, social norms that seemed second nature to others were an enigma to me, making even the simplest interactions daunting. My family, loving and well-meaning as they were, often struggled to understand my unique perspective. My literal interpretations of the world and distinct communication style made me stand apart. As a child, I found comfort in structure and predictability. Numbers and facts felt like a safe haven, offering the kind of order that social situations lacked. This preference deeply shaped my early years and education. Teachers, like Mrs. Hillman, would notice my sharp focus on specific details, while my peers, such as Jake and Daniel, often viewed me as the odd one out. However, as time passed, I came to realize that my differences were also strengths. My talent for analysis and problem-solving began to shine, qualities that would later become invaluable both personally and professionally. Throughout my journey, I often found inspiration in characters from books and films who seemed to share my challenges. One that stands out is the film Rain Man. Dustin Hoffman's portrayal of Raymond Babbitt, an autistic character with extraordinary abilities, struck a chord with me. While my experience wasn't identical, I resonated with his struggles and his triumphs. Living with Asperger's, I've learned to adapt and blend in, though my quirks remain part of who I am. Unlike most, I struggle with unspoken social cues. For instance, I might miss subtle signals, like someone glancing at their watch to hint that a conversation should end. My world is grounded in logic, structure, and directness, which often makes navigating social interactions a complex puzzle. People tend to stereotype individuals like me as being tech geniuses or eccentric academics. Think of someone like Derek from my office, who compares me to Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory. In some ways, those assumptions aren't far off. I'm precise and detail-oriented, which has its advantages. As one of my professors, Dr. Rowland, once noted, people with Asperger's often excel because they follow rules and focus intensely. For me, eye contact has always been a challenge. I've trained myself to focus on people's mouths or noses instead. Small talk isn't my forte, but if you want to discuss topics like medieval history, Doberman puppies, or atomic bomb tests, I can talk for hours. My adherence to rules helped me excel in school, but it has also posed challenges in understanding social expectations. For example, when my first boss, Mr. Grant, explained that an employee needed a week off for a funeral, I naively questioned why a single day wasn't enough. It wasn't a lack of empathy, it was my logical mind trying to reconcile the time requested with the event. Losing my parents at a young age added another layer of complexity to my life. My grandparents, Evelyn and Frank, raised me with love and patience, though I was often a source of surprise for them. They had already raised 6 children, none of whom spent nearly as much time in the principal's office as I did, usually not for bad behavior, but for the unusual and thought-provoking questions I brought up in class. My 3rd grade teacher, Ms. Jackson, was particularly baffled by my endless curiosity, once telling Evelyn that I was too smart for my own good. Looking back, I see how these early challenges shaped me into who I am today. While my journey hasn't been conventional, it's been a story of growth, resilience, and self-discovery. And while I've faced obstacles, I've also learned to embrace the unique way I see the world, something that makes me, well, me. Growing up, I had a way of questioning things that often left people either laughing or scratching their heads. I'd ask things like, if this is anti-bullying week, what was last week, or, in case of fire, why do we line up shortest to tallest, do taller people burn slower? One question even got me into trouble, why is Black History Month the shortest month of the year? My teachers didn't always appreciate my curiosity, but it was genuine. I didn't mean to be disruptive, I just saw the world differently. Academically, I excelled. I even earned a scholarship, though my grandfather, Frank, often muttered under his breath, "There's something not right with this boy." Socially, though, I was a bit of a late bloomer. I didn't date in high school. The mind games girls played with teenage boys were as baffling to me as an unsolved equation. Instead, I threw myself into books and learning, finding comfort in knowledge. Frank, a practical man with a military background, decided to take matters into his own hands. For my 18th birthday, he hired a courtesan. While unconventional, and likely frowned upon by most families, it thrilled me at the time. Like any curious teenager, I arranged for repeat visits whenever I could afford it. It's funny how life works, though. This chapter of my youth indirectly inspired my first novel years later. One of my most vivid memories from those early days involves an encounter I had during a routine act of community service. As part of my scholarship, I volunteered for Meals on Wheels. I chose it because it seemed straightforward, less risk of awkward social situations. One day, as I stopped to fill my gas tank before starting my route, an altercation unfolded that would change everything. Two men, whom I mentally dubbed Mutt and Jeff, because of their height difference, bumped into my grandmother's pristine car. I was furious, but I stayed calm. "We'll wait for the police," I told them firmly. "They're already on the way. I need a report for the insurance, and you both owe me for the damage." Mutt snarled, "The cops are already here. Now unlock this junk." He stepped closer, but something felt off. No uniforms, no visible badges. "Can I see some ID, please?" I asked. Before I knew it, Mutt grabbed my arm. Reflexively, I countered with a move I'd practiced countless times in Iaido class. Dropping to one knee, I spun under his arm, using his momentum to flip him over my shoulder. He landed with a thud, gasping for air. Standing, I warned, "You touched me first. Please don't try it again." Jeff wasn't deterred. He charged at me, head down like a football player. I sidestepped him, but before I could react further, he stumbled into a bucket of water and was hit with an unexpected 1,500 volts from a live wire submerged inside. He convulsed and collapsed, still twitching. Mutt came at me again, this time with a collapsible baton. I grabbed a wooden-handled scraper from the bucket and used it to parry his clumsy attacks. Hooking his ankle with the scraper, I caused him to stumble backward. Behind me, the girl in my car, who had been screaming moments ago, now laughed nervously. The chaos ended with Mutt and Jeff subdued, but the real shock came later. I learned they were actual police officers. They had been there in plain clothes to investigate unrelated activity and decided to confront me after the car damage. After my arrest, I was cuffed to a chair, enduring their wrath until other officers intervened. Word of the incident spread quickly in jail. Apparently, flipping two cops earned me a certain level of respect among the other inmates. The guards, on the other hand, were uneasy around me after that. Some even went out of their way to emphasize they had treated me fairly, distancing themselves from what had happened. On the second day, a jailer named Anthony opened my cell door and said, "Come with me." From that moment, the tone of my experience shifted. Even in the most unlikely circumstances, I learned how quickly people's perception of you can change, sometimes for the better, sometimes for worse. I hadn't seen the judge since he went into chambers. As I sat waiting, an administrative assistant approached me. "Would you like something to drink?" she asked with a polite smile. "Yes, watermelon juice," I replied. Her brows furrowed in surprise. "Watermelon juice," she repeated, like it was the strangest thing she'd ever heard. "Well, you did say anything, didn't you?" I reminded her. She sighed. "We only have soda, tea, and coffee. No watermelon juice." I paused, feigning disappointment. "So, when you said anything, you didn't really mean it?" "That's misleading." The girl next to me, Dawn, stepped in with her usual confidence. "We'll both have a soda." "Any kind, Thanks, she said, waving off the exchange. As the assistant left, Dawn turned to me, her voice dripping with her signature indignation. It's not like a giant store like this would go bankrupt if they stocked a wider variety of drinks. Do you know how little these corporations pay in taxes? Or how badly they treat their employees? Not to mention their use of child labor overseas. What does any of that have to do with you stealing from them? I asked, cutting through her rant. This particular store is a franchise, you know, I added. You weren't stealing from a faceless corporation, you were stealing from a small family business. Dawn shrugged and waved dismissively. Whatever. Moments like this were par for the course with Dawn. Her ability to justify her actions, no matter how flawed her reasoning, was almost impressive. But her indignation shifted abruptly as she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. Aren't you mad about the city's police force? Full of corrupt flunkies, living off bribes? She smirked. You're one of a kind, Anthony. I raised an eyebrow. What's this about now? Well, she began dramatically, after the cops arrested you, they were so busy trying to deal with you that I managed to sneak away and hide at a nearby gas station. Good to know you had my back, I said dryly. Wait, it gets better, she continued, ignoring me. I saw those two officers go into the convenience store, take the security tape, and threaten the clerk. And guess what? She held up her phone triumphantly. I recorded the whole thing. They had no idea I was there. They didn't identify themselves as police when they first attacked me. I asked, the puzzle pieces falling into place. Exactly, Dawn confirmed. I even got them on camera planting meth in your car. At that moment, the commissioner's assistant reappeared and motioned toward me. Anthony, His Honor will see you now. The aftermath was swift. Both officers were fired and charged, their conduct too egregious for even the department to defend. This wasn't their first complaint, and it turned out they were moonlighting on the shopping center's payroll while on duty, sealing their fate. Other officers involved received reprimands, and the commissioner seemed relieved to finally cut ties with the pair. Later, Dawn and I found ourselves at a steakhouse, one of the best in the city. The kind of place my grandparents used to take me for special occasions. Their seasonal crabs and lobsters were legendary, and I had fond memories of family holidays spent here. Dawn, as usual, found something to complain about. Dropping the menu, she exclaimed, I can't eat anything here. This place is barbaric. I looked at her incredulously. Barbaric? This is one of the best restaurants in the city. They hunt and kill these animals, she said, horrified. Dawn, I said, trying to reason with her, our ancient ancestors only succeeded in hunting about 10% of the time. Hunting was dangerous, broken bones, sprained ankles, injuries meant the end of the line without medical care. Without greens and tubers to balance things out, they'd have starved. She grimaced. Anthony, stop. You're making it worse. And don't even mention spiders or termites. That's disgusting. Clasping my hands, I decided it was best to let the conversation drop. With Dawn, every meal was an adventure, one I wasn't always sure I was prepared for. I continued, you know, cave people got most of their protein from insects. Termites, for instance, were 38% protein, and in Venezuela, one species is still considered a delicacy, like key lime pie. Dawn rolled her eyes. Anthony, not everything has to turn into one of your fun facts. But it's fascinating. I replied, grinning. Conversations like this had become the norm for us, and despite her exasperation, I could tell she enjoyed my quirks, most of the time. Our relationship was progressing quickly, and it only made sense that if Dawn was my girlfriend, we should live together. My small apartment wasn't enough for both of us, so I used the settlement money from the police case to buy a larger place. Money had never been my focus, but Dawn seemed to appreciate the opportunities it provided. At the time, I was studying math and accounting. I loved the precision of math, but my grandfather, Frank, had always emphasized practicality. Accountants are always in demand, he'd said, and I took that advice seriously. Dawn, on the other hand, was more of a free spirit. I never knew exactly what she studied in college. She had always been more focused on relationships, dating, living together, marriage, than kids. It took 2 weeks of convincing, but Dawn finally agreed to marry me. We headed to the courthouse, and that year became one of the most incredible of my life. Dawn became my wife, and not long after, our daughter was born. Her arrival, however, brought our first major disagreement. Dawn wanted a home birth. Anthony, she insisted, I want her born here, in a place of love, right next to where she'll sleep and eat. Dawn, I replied, trying to keep my tone light, you don't even like cooking, but you want to give birth in the kitchen. She gave me a look, and I knew I wasn't going to win that argument. Ultimately, we found a compromise at a birthing center. As the years passed, life became a blend of challenges and joys. Dawn poured herself into her activism, shifting her focus to environmental causes. Humans are the biggest threat to blue whales, she'd say passionately. True, I'd reply, but who else would hunt a blue whale? Pelicans with machine tools. Lions on jet skis. She didn't always appreciate my humor. Dawn's approach to climate change also raised some eyebrows. Dawn, I asked one day, watching her climb into her Cadillac Escalade, don't you think it's ironic to drive this to a Save the Planet rally? She looked at me, unfazed. It's about the message, Anthony, not the method. Eventually, life took a turn. I left my high-paying job for a smaller one at a local bank. It meant giving up European trips, private schools, luxury cars, and even Starbucks. But I was proud of how well the kids adapted. My daughter loved her new public school, and my son enjoyed the big yard. Life at the bank was simpler, and the people were kind. But it became clear that Dawn wasn't happy. I hadn't realized just how unhappy she was until one evening, 8 months after we moved, I found her in our bedroom packing a suitcase. Dawn, I said, keeping my tone light, looks like you're going on a trip. Her expression was hard, her movements deliberate. Stop arguing, Anthony. You won't win this. I met her gaze, lowering my voice. Any spouse can win if they're willing to go far enough. That's called divorce. Her face softened, surprised. We're not going to be part of the 50% that end in divorce. Maybe not, I replied quietly, but the other 50% end when death do us part. Dawn hesitated, her hand resting on the suitcase. For a moment, it seemed like she might stay. But the tension lingered. Not long after, my daughter sat me down, visibly upset. Dad, she said, frustration etched into her face, you have to do something about Mom. She's ruining my reputation at school. Do you even know what people are saying about us? I looked at her, trying to process her words. It was a stark reminder that the cracks in our relationship weren't just affecting Dawn and me, they were rippling out to the kids. Something had to change, but how do you mend something when you're not sure where it broke? I placed a reassuring hand on my daughter's shoulder. Sweetheart, I said gently, we can't control what people say. And honestly, most people probably aren't even thinking about us. She rolled her eyes, her voice heavy with teenage exasperation. Dad, aren't you even a little bothered that Mom is out there, embarrassing the whole family? The words stung, but I tried to stay calm. Dawn thinks what she's doing matters, maybe not to us, but to her and the people she's with. Dad, she said, letting out a frustrated breath, how are we her priority when she's living in a tent with some other guy? I hesitated, searching for the right response. Don't be ridiculous, Anthony, Dawn had said when I confronted her about it weeks earlier. We're just sharing a tent. It's not like we're sleeping together. Really? I had replied, unable to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. Because his blog post, titled Occupying the U in Cape, suggests otherwise. Anthony, do you really believe everything you read online? She shot back, rolling her eyes as if I were the one being unreasonable. He's just exaggerating. I stayed firm. Dawn, our daughter heard about it at school. I just printed out the posts to confirm. Dawn softened slightly but still held her ground. Look, Anthony, I'm sorry. I got caught up in the moment. How long was that moment, Dawn? I asked, my tone sharpening. I sent you 7 photos with dates from 7 different nights. There was a long pause on the line before she admitted, all right, maybe sleeping with him wasn't the smartest decision. But it was just one guy. I couldn't help the disbelieving laugh that escaped. And what does the number of partners have to do with anything, Dawn? She fell silent, static crackling faintly in the background. It was a familiar dance, she'd deflect, and I'd try to ground the conversation in facts, though it rarely led anywhere productive. Her tone shifted abruptly, icy now. Anthony. Divorce is not an option. Dawn, I said, keeping my voice level, there are no right answers to wrong questions. Fine, Anthony, she snapped. You want to bet on how this ends? I sighed, wishing for a moment of peace, clarity, or even just understanding. It felt like every conversation with Dawn was a battle I didn't want to fight but couldn't walk away from. I glanced back at my daughter, her face etched with worry and frustration. We'll figure this out, I said, though even I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. I'll ruin you for this. Remember, whoever came with a knife will die by the knife. Dawn's voice crackled through the phone, venomous and sharp. I blinked, baffled. What does cutlery have to do with our divorce, Dawn? Her response was a stream of curse words, punctuated by the line abruptly going dead. That was Dawn, dramatic to the very end. In the end, she cleaned me out during the divorce. I had prepared myself for the worst, but it still hit harder than I expected. After everything, the memories of the good times we had felt buried under the weight of resentment. At least I had some sense of dignity left. I hadn't stooped to Dawn's level, and that mattered to me. Talking to Janet about it later, I tried to make sense of everything. She was an old friend and one of the few people who truly understood the chaos that had unfolded. Janet, I said, what did they expect me to do? Touch my ex-wife? That's just not who I am. Janet patted my shoulder sympathetically. I get it, Anthony. None of this is your fault. Your ex, well, let's just say Dawn isn't exactly stable. Honestly, with all the therapists, meds, and self-help out there, I bet 1/4 of women in this country are on some kind of mental health treatment. I thought about it for a moment. Wow, Janet. That means 75% of women are walking around with untreated mental health issues. She smirked and gave me a playful shove. Don't get philosophical on me. Just focus on picking up the pieces. The next morning, I arrived at the bank early, greeted by an elderly guard who unlocked the doors with a warm smile. The day started uneventfully. I greeted my team as they trickled in, exchanged some small talk, and made my usual rounds. After ensuring everything was in order, I stepped into the restroom for a quick break. When I returned, I froze in my tracks. 2 men wearing ski masks stood in the lobby, holding my employees at gunpoint. My team was lined up against the wall, some visibly shaking. One of my tellers, a young woman named Emily, had a dark stain spreading on her pants. One of the men, wielding what looked like a grenade, barked out orders. Are you the manager? I raised my hands, stepping forward cautiously. Yes, I'm Anthony. What do you want? Do you have the ash from storage yet? The other man demanded, pointing a menacing tool, some kind of industrial implement, at the elderly guard's temple. It's all still there, I said evenly. No one's touched it. Then let them go, the first robber snapped, shoving Janet toward me. She stumbled, falling to the floor as I caught her arm to steady her. The man with the tool gestured for me to move toward the vault, and I complied, leading them through the back. Inside the vault, we ended up in a small room behind the safes with a barred door separating us from the rest of the bank. The first robber stuffed wads of cash into a paper bag before taking off, leaving the bomber behind to block our exit. I could hear the muffled sobs of my employees as we waited, the tension thick in the air. Moments later, the bomber smirked, lifting the grenade. "You all stay put if you want to live," he sneered, waving the device like a twisted trophy. Then, without warning, he pulled the pin and tossed it. I scrambled to react, but the door to the deposit room slammed shut just as the blast echoed through the space. My escape route was blocked, and panic set in as I searched desperately for an alternative. My eyes landed on the display safe we used for demonstrations, sitting open on the counter. Without thinking, I lunged toward it, my mind racing to figure out my next move. The seconds ticked by, heavy and suffocating. I had to act fast if I wanted to survive this nightmare. With no time to think, I shoved the grenade into the display safe and slammed it shut, holding it with my left hand as I turned to wedge it into an open space in the wall among the bank's other safes. Just as I ducked away, the world erupted into a blinding white light, the sound of the explosion deafening. The force flung me backward over the counter, and everything went dark. When I came to, the sterile white of a hospital ceiling greeted me. My head pounded, and my vision swam as I tried to make sense of where I was. A doctor leaned over me, clipboard in hand, giving me a once-over with a professional, yet friendly, smile. "You're lucky," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "The blast threw fragments into your face and scalp, but they'll heal fine. Besides," he added with a grin, "chicks dig scars." I tried to smile, but my face didn't cooperate. "What else?" I managed to croak. "You also lost a couple of fingers and a thumb," he continued, pointing his pen at my bandaged left hand. "The good news is the thumb's root was intact, so I reattached it. With rehab, you should regain about 80 to 85% mobility in that arm." I stared at him, processing the information. "But no piano at Carnegie Hall?" I joked weakly. The doctor chuckled. "Probably not." "Good," I said, confused. "I've never even played the piano, let alone at Carnegie Hall." He shook his head, laughing softly. "Well, I guess your music career will have to wait." Later that day, when I returned to the bank, the atmosphere was surprisingly warm. Almost every cop in the county had been present during the aftermath, ensuring the robbers were promptly arrested. The bank manager approached me, his hand clamping down on my shoulder. "Take as much time as you need, Anthony," he said sincerely. "We're all proud of you." Janet, standing nearby, gave me a half-smile. "Your kids are with mine and the nanny," she said. "They're having a blast, so don't worry." Her voice was calm, but her words carried weight. "You did good, Anthony," she added. "Not just for the bank, for all of us." I looked at her skeptically. "But once this goes to court, the truth will come out. Everyone will know it wasn't a real bomb." Janet chuckled, shaking her head. "Those two idiots already took a plea deal. They'll never admit it was just a flashbang. Their reputation in prison is better if people think they were big-time criminals." She winked, her humor disarming. I sighed. It wasn't perfect, but I'd take it. A surprise visit. A few days later, as I recovered at home, the door swung open, and I turned to see Dawn standing there, arms wide. "Oh my God," she exclaimed, rushing toward me. "I came as soon as I heard. I barely managed to arrange a plane and limo." She wrapped her arms around me tightly, but I didn't respond, my body stiff. When she pulled back, I noticed a flicker of hesitation in her eyes as she looked me over. I'd put on some weight, something I was painfully aware of, but my lifestyle as a single dad and bank manager left little time for fitness routines. "Well, Anthony," she said, gesturing at my stomach with an exaggerated smile, don't worry. I have a new diet for you. I stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or cry. The blast may not have killed me, but moments like this were a reminder that recovery, physical or otherwise, wasn't going to be easy. I'm very excited about this opportunity. Dawn exclaimed, her face lit up with enthusiasm. It's the perfect ending to my story. I nurse you back to health, we rebuild our family, it's like a made-for-TV movie. Lifetime is thrilled, we might even get a series out of it. She extended her hand to me, her publicist nodding eagerly beside her. Anthony, this could mean a lot of money and fame for, well, for us. No, I replied, my voice steady and firm. Dawn blinked, caught off guard. What? No, I repeated, locking eyes with her. Which part of no didn't you understand? Her publicist quickly jumped in, attempting to salvage the moment. Anthony, do you really want to be cast as the villainous husband? Dawn, this could be a wonderful narrative arc, a redemption story for both of you. Even if you make a story out of this, I said, cutting her off, no one, not even the dog, will care. Dawn turned to Janet, desperate for backup. You're a Bible believer, right? Isn't there something in the Bible about forgiveness? Can't you help me out here? Janet let go of my arm and stepped forward, meeting Dawn's gaze head-on. I don't have a Bible verse, she said evenly, but I do have a line for Anthony. She pointed toward the door. Get out of his house. Dawn and her publicist stood frozen, stunned into silence. The publicist opened her mouth as if to respond but thought better of it. As they shuffled toward the door, Janet couldn't resist a parting jab. Don't worry, Dawn. I'm sure you can still pitch your story to one of those obscure cable channels for insomniacs. Dawn spun around, her face a mix of outrage and embarrassment, but before she could retort, Janet added with a smirk, looks like you've caught a case of Vapaz Lucas. What's that? I asked, genuinely curious. Janet grinned. It's a condition where people chase fame without accomplishing anything real. They end up on obscure cable channels and sometimes even in reverse mortgage ads. The kids overheard from the next room and burst into laughter. I wasn't entirely convinced Vapaz Lucas was a real condition, but Janet's dry humor brought much-needed levity to the moment. After the storm. From confrontations at the bank to standoffs in my personal life, these encounters had tested me in ways I never anticipated. Yet through it all, I had come to appreciate the strength that comes from living authentically, Asperger's quirks and all. In the chaos, Janet's steady presence had been my anchor. Her unwavering support reminded me that genuine connections are possible, even for someone like me, who has always seen the world from a slightly different angle. We shared more than laughs, we shared understanding. It was a bond woven from love, acceptance, and the quiet resilience of someone who chooses to stand by your side through life's ups and downs. Janet saw my unique path and didn't just tolerate it, she walked it with me. Months passed, and life began to settle into something resembling normalcy. The house, once a stage for chaos, became a sanctuary of quiet resilience. Dawn had faded from our lives like a storm moving on to batter someone else's shores, leaving only the faintest echoes of her drama. The kids adjusted, their laughter filling the once tense spaces, and Janet's steadfast presence became a cornerstone of our lives. One crisp autumn evening, I found myself sitting on the porch, the sunset painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. Janet joined me, her presence warm and steady as ever. She handed me a mug of tea, her fingers brushing mine briefly. "Penny for your thoughts?" she asked, leaning against the railing. I stared out at the horizon, letting the words come slowly. I used to think my life would be defined by structure and rules. Math, accounting, predictability, it was all I knew how to trust. Then dawn came along, and, well, I thought chaos was the price of connection. And now? Janet prompted softly. I turned to her, the weight of realization settling over me. Now I know it's not about chaos or control. It's about choosing the people who see you, not just the parts that are easy to understand, but the whole messy, complicated picture. Janet smiled, her eyes searching mine. So, what's next for you, Anthony? I chuckled, a genuine laugh for the first time in what felt like years. For the first time, I don't have a plan. And somehow, that feels okay. A comfortable silence fell between us, broken only by the rustling of leaves in the evening breeze. But deep down, I knew the story wasn't quite over. 1 year later. A year to the day after the chaos of the bank robbery, I stood in front of a modest crowd at a local community center. The room was filled with people, parents, teens, even a few teachers, gathered for a seminar on resilience and navigating life with Asperger's. My story had found a new purpose, one that didn't require fame or fortune, just a willingness to be honest. As I finished speaking, a boy no older than 12 raised his hand. Does it ever get easier? You know, being different. I paused, considering my response. No, I said honestly. It doesn't get easier. But you get stronger. And eventually, you stop wanting to be like everyone else, because you realize being different is what makes you, you. The boy nodded, his expression thoughtful. As the crowd applauded, Janet approached, a proud smile on her face. She handed me a note, a small piece of paper folded neatly. What's this? I asked, opening it. Just something I think you should read. Inside, in Janet's tidy handwriting, were 5 words. You are finally home, Anthony. For the first time in years, I felt it. Home wasn't a place, it was the people who stayed, who chose to walk alongside you, flaws and all. And with Janet by my side and my children thriving, I realized the most gripping ending to my story wasn't about drama or revenge. It was about finally letting go and embracing the life I never thought I deserved.